You will never awaken until you understand this sixth level of consciousness, spiritual deep. The journey of awakening follows a progression through different levels of consciousness. Many traditions describe these stages in varying ways, but a six-level framework can help provide clarity on the path to true spiritual awakening. These levels represent shifts in perception, understanding, and being. 1. The sleep state, unawakened consciousness. This is the lowest level of consciousness, where the individual is entirely absorbed in the material world, unaware of their true nature. It is called the sleep state because, although a person may be physically awake, their mind and soul remain dormant, trapped in illusion and unconscious patterns. Characteristics of the sleep state. Identification with the physical world. The person believes they are only their body and mind, unaware of the deeper spiritual reality. They see life as a series of external events rather than an unfolding of inner consciousness. Driven by survival instincts, most thoughts and actions are dictated by basic desires: food, comfort, power, and social validation. Fear and pleasure rule their decisions. Ego-dominated mindset. The self is perceived as separate from others, leading to competition, comparison, and conflict. The illusion of separation creates suffering. Reactive living. Instead of responding with wisdom, they react to life's challenges based on conditioning and past experiences. Limited awareness of higher truths. Spiritual concepts may seem foreign, unimportant, or even foolish. The idea of a higher self, divine intelligence, or universal oneness is dismissed or ignored. Subject to external control. Their beliefs, thoughts, and emotions are shaped by societal programming, mainstream media, and cultural norms without question. Why do people stay in this state? Many remain in this level because it feels comfortable and familiar. Awakening requires questioning everything one has been taught, which can be unsettling. Fear of the unknown keeps people asleep, as does attachment to material pleasures and external validation. Breaking free from the sleep state. The first step toward awakening is self-awareness, beginning to observe one's thoughts, emotions, and reactions without being controlled by them. Asking deep questions like, who am I beyond my body and mind? Or what is the true nature of reality? Can initiate the journey out of unconsciousness. Many spiritual traditions speak of this state as Maya, illusion, the world of shadows, or ignorance. Overcoming it requires courage, curiosity, and the willingness to seek truth beyond appearances. 2. Awakening to duality, self-awareness begins. This stage marks the beginning of true awakening. The individual starts questioning their life, beliefs, and the nature of reality. This is often triggered by a life event, loss, suffering, or a sudden realization that shakes their old worldview. At this level, the person becomes aware that reality is not just physical, but also mental and spiritual. However, they still see the world through the lens of duality, light and dark, good and evil, self and others. The illusion of separation is still strong, but awareness has begun to break through. Characteristics of awakening to duality. Self-reflection begins. The person starts questioning their identity, purpose, and existence. Thoughts like, who am I beyond my roles and labels? Or, why do I keep repeating the same cycles? Become common. Awareness of internal conflict. They start noticing the struggle between their higher self and their conditioned ego. There is a desire to grow spiritually, yet the old mind resists change. Heightened sensitivity. Emotions become more intense, and a deeper sense of empathy emerges. The person may feel disconnected from old habits, people, or societal expectations. Struggle between the material and the spiritual. There is a pull between worldly attachments, money, status, desires, and a yearning for something more meaningful. Many experience confusion or existential crisis at this stage. Beginning to see beyond illusions. The person realizes that much of what they believed about themselves, society, and life is based on conditioning. They begin questioning everything, from religious doctrines to personal relationships. Challenges at this stage. Cognitive dissonance. Old beliefs clash with new insights, creating inner turmoil. Feeling lost or isolated. The person may feel like they no longer fit in with their old environment, but have not yet found their true path. Temptation to return to sleep. The discomfort of awakening might lead them to suppress their awareness, returning to distractions and old habits. How to progress beyond duality. To move beyond this stage, one must develop inner stillness, observe their thoughts without identifying with them, and recognize that duality is an illusion. There is no absolute good or evil, only different levels of understanding. Meditation, self-inquiry, and deep contemplation help transition to the next stage. 3. The mental expansion, higher knowledge, and inner exploration. At this stage, the individual actively seeks truth and deeper understanding. The mind expands beyond societal conditioning, and the person becomes a seeker of knowledge, studying philosophy, spirituality, metaphysics, and universal laws. This is the level where intellectual awakening begins, and deep questions about existence take center stage. Characteristics of mental expansion. Hunger for knowledge. The person devours books, teachings, and wisdom traditions, exploring subjects like consciousness, quantum physics, esoteric philosophy, and spirituality. Breaking free from old paradigms. The realization sets in that much of what was taught about life, self, and reality was incomplete or misleading. This brings both excitement and disillusionment. Understanding energy and universal laws. Concepts like the law of attraction, vibrational frequency, and cause and effect, karma, become clearer. The individual realizes thoughts and emotions shape their reality. Meditation and introspection deepen. Instead of reacting emotionally, they begin observing their thoughts, questioning their reactions, and detaching from unnecessary suffering. Heightened perception, awareness of synchronicities, intuitive insights, and hidden patterns in life increases. Dreams, signs, and inner guidance become more vivid. Challenges at this stage. Information overload. Many get lost in an endless search for knowledge but fail to apply it in daily life. Intellectual ego. Some become overly attached to their newfound wisdom, looking down on others who are still asleep. This can lead to arrogance rather than true understanding. Emotional turmoil. Learning deep truths about existence can be overwhelming, leading to moments of existential crisis. How to progress to the next level. Mental expansion is powerful, but true transformation comes when knowledge turns into direct experience. To move beyond this stage, one must shift from intellectual learning to heart-centered wisdom, living and embodying the truths they have discovered. Meditation, inner silence, and humility are essential. 4. The heart-centered awakening, unity, and inner peace. At this stage, consciousness shifts from the mind to the heart. The individual moves beyond intellectual understanding and begins to embody spiritual wisdom. The illusion of separation starts dissolving, and an inner sense of unity, love, and peace emerges. This is a profound transformation where spirituality is no longer just a philosophy. It becomes a lived experience. Compassion, kindness, and inner stillness take precedence over seeking knowledge or debating concepts. Characteristics of the heart-centered awakening. Shift from thinking to being. Instead of just studying spiritual truths, the person begins living them, responding with love rather than fear, choosing peace over conflict. Deep compassion and empathy. The suffering of others is felt deeply, but without attachment. The individual naturally desires to help and serve. Inner stillness and intuition. The need for external validation diminishes as inner guidance becomes stronger. Intuition and synchronicities become frequent. Dissolving of judgment. Instead of labeling people and situations as good or bad, there is understanding and acceptance of the divine play of consciousness. Living in the present moment. The mind is no longer trapped in regrets of the past or anxieties about the future. Presence becomes the natural state. Challenges at this stage. Letting go of the ego's control. The ego still tries to reassert itself, creating moments of doubt, fear, or attachment. Emotional sensitivity. Being open-hearted makes one more sensitive to the pain of the world. Learning to maintain inner peace despite external chaos is key. Testing from life. Situations may arise that challenge one's inner peace, serving as lessons to deepen the awakening. How to progress to the next level. To move beyond this stage, one must fully surrender to the flow of life, and transcend even the subtle attachments to identity. This leads to the next phase, transcendence of ego, the death of the false self. 5. Transcendence of ego, the death of the false self. At this stage, the individual confronts the greatest illusion of all, the false self, ego. Up to this point, awakening has been about expanding knowledge, deepening awareness, and embodying love. But here, something more radical happens, the complete dissolution of personal identity. This is the death of the ego, not in a physical sense, but as a shift in identification. The person no longer sees themselves as a separate entity with a personal story, but as pure consciousness itself. This is one of the most challenging and liberating stages of awakening. Characteristics of ego transcendence. The realization that I is an illusion. The sense of being an individual self, separate from the universe, collapses. The person sees that their thoughts, emotions, and personality are just temporary appearances in consciousness. Surrendering personal identity, the attachment to labels, past experiences, achievements, and even spiritual concepts fades. There is no longer a need to prove anything or cling to a personal story. Freedom from fear and desire. Without an ego to protect, there is nothing to fear. Without a separate self to satisfy, desires lose their grip. Life flows effortlessly. A sense of emptiness and fullness simultaneously. There is a paradox. On one hand, everything feels empty because the ego is gone. Yet there is an overwhelming fullness of being. This is pure existence. Non-attachment to thoughts and emotions. Even strong emotions, like anger or sadness, may arise, but they no longer define the person. They pass like clouds in the sky. Challenges at this stage. The ego's last struggle. The ego resists its own dissolution. It tries to cling to some identity, even a spiritual one, to avoid disappearing completely. Fear of losing control. The mind fears that without an identity, life will lose meaning. But in reality, true freedom only comes after the ego is transcended. Moments of void or loneliness. Because the ego has always been the center of experience, its dissolution may initially feel like nothingness or loss. However, this emptiness is actually the doorway to true presence. How to progress to the next level. The final stage is divine consciousness, oneness with all that is. To reach it, one must fully surrender, letting go of every attachment to self and dissolving into the infinite. This is the return to the true source, where nothing is separate and all is one. 6. Divine consciousness, oneness with all that is. This is the highest level of awakening, where the illusion of separation dissolves completely. The individual no longer identifies with the personal self, but recognizes their true nature as pure consciousness, the infinite, the divine itself. At this stage, there is no longer a search for enlightenment, because one realizes they were never separate from it. There is no more seeking, only being. Characteristics of divine consciousness. Oneness with all that exists. The boundaries between self and other disappear. Everything, people, nature, space, time, is seen as one unified field of consciousness. Effortless flow with life. There is no resistance, no grasping. Life unfolds perfectly, and one flows with it like a river returning to the ocean. Perpetual peace and bliss. Even in the midst of challenges, there is an unshakable stillness. Suffering ends because the self that suffered no longer exists. Love without attachment. Love is no longer personal, but universal. It is not, I love you, but I am love itself. Freedom from birth and death. The realization arises that the body and mind are temporary, but consciousness is eternal. Death loses all meaning. Pure awareness beyond thought. Thoughts may still arise, but they no longer define experience. There is only presence, timeless, infinite awareness. Challenges at this stage. Living in the world while being beyond it. Even after awakening, one must still engage with daily life. The challenge is to remain in this state while interacting with those still bound by illusion. Communicating the ineffable. This level of consciousness is beyond words. Trying to describe it often fails because language is limited. Returning to ordinary life. Some choose solitude, while others serve the world. The awakened being acts not from ego, but as a vessel for divine will. Final realization. There was never a separate self to begin with. There was never anything to seek or attain. You have always been this infinite presence. Awakening was not about becoming something new. It was about remembering what you have always been. At this level, the journey ends. Or rather, it is seen that there was never a journey, only the eternal now. Son, be still and know that I am. Psalm 46 verse 10. Final realization, the end of seeking. At the highest level of consciousness, the great paradox is revealed. There was never anything to seek, nothing to attain, and no separate self to awaken. The entire journey, with all its struggles, realizations, and transformations, was part of the illusion of separation. The truth is you have always been what you were seeking. Awakening was not about becoming something new. It was about remembering your eternal nature. Key realizations at the end of the journey. There was never a separate you. The ego, the personal self, was just a temporary illusion. There is no me and other, only one unified field of existence. Time and space are mental constructs. Past, present, and future are illusions of the mind. Everything exists now, eternally. Nothing was ever missing. The search for fulfillment was an illusion because you were already whole. The desire to awaken was the only thing keeping you from seeing that you were never unawakened. Everything is divine, including ordinary life. There is no sacred versus mundane. All is God, all is spirit. Washing dishes, walking, breathing, it's all divine, because existence itself is the miracle. There is only presence, only being. Thoughts come and go, experiences rise and fall, but the eternal witness remains. That witness is what you truly are, beyond name, form, and identity. The ultimate truth, I am. At the core of every mystical tradition, this realization echoes. I and the Father are one. John 10 verse 30. Be still and know that I am. Psalm 46 verse 10. Tat tvam asi, you are that. Upanishads. The self alone is real. The world is an illusion. Ramana Maharshi. When this truth is fully realized, all fear, desire, and separation dissolve. What remains is pure awareness, unconditional love, and infinite peace. The search is over. The journey was never real. All that remains is being. What now? Once this is understood, life continues, but now it is lived effortlessly. There is no need to escape the world or cling to spiritual ideas. Instead, one moves through life with deep peace, knowing that everything is already perfect.